can take off the papers and plunge into the issues for the day. Stay with us. One of the stories on the front page is about the oil spill in the Ogoni land, specifically in Rivers State. And just yesterday, Federal High Court orders Shell Petroleum Company to pay 45.9 billion naira to the people of Ogoni in Rivers State within 21 days. And if you dig further, you'll find that this dates 3 decades and more. Is this justice in time, or what do you make of all of these? Let's get some perspective from Israel Aye, who is a partner, commercial and energy law practice, Candelp, and is director, Aspen Energy. He joins us virtually this morning from Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Aye. Now, first of all, what do you make of this? There are those who would say this is coming way too late in time.
Thank you very much for having me, but there's not much else anyone can add. I think this sort of brings focus to what everyone who's talked about the governance of the petroleum industry, the energy sector, have talked about. This basically brings focus and attention to a number of things. One of which would be perhaps whether these kinds of matters can be left to the judicial process. You know, in the spectrum of dispute resolution, there are fora and avenues that better fit certain types of situations. And as we can see, the judicial process in and of itself lends itself to these kinds of delays. But elsewhere, you find that environmental issues are dealt with rather more administratively rather than judicially. You know, and hopefully some of the adjustments and amendments that have been proposed in the petroleum industry bill soon to become an act will address some of those concerns. In particular, in general, we are at a place where we need to think about the governance of the petroleum industry in general. You know, we need to think about it. Why? Because hitherto we had players that were global entities, and you would argue are subject to some form of global best practice, are probably liable to other jurisdictions other than here. But as you see the landscape evolving, and a lot of those big multinationals and big corporates are beginning to exit, and we're going to have a flood, a mushrooming of local entities, and that's a great development. Our regulatory framework and institutions need to be capable of dealing with that scenario. I don't know if I explained myself clearly, or if
it's understood there. But you know, one of the questions that came to my mind while thinking about the conversation I'm having with you right now is, first of all, at the initial stage, given how we began oil exploration in Nigeria, do you think the host communities and impacted communities, will come back to that definition later, were even considered in the first place? Because that could have been the reason for the prolonged judgment on this matter. It took 30 years and so many lives and livelihoods lost in the process. Do you think we actually planned to engage host communities when we began this oil exploration in the country?
Excellent point you asked me, to be honest with you. The Petroleum Act and the entire legal and fiscal framework of the petroleum industry, if you look at it very carefully, began as little more than a licensing regime for petroleum operations upstream. Not even gas, it was oil operations upstream. We didn't have any clear vision as to what we'd do. We didn't want gas, we didn't know how to deal with gas, we didn't know how to trade gas. And so we didn't have that much up till 1993 when we entered into the the production sharing contracts. We didn't even have a framework for gas development or indeed monetization. So you would argue that the Petroleum Act in itself, which is the principal act, or at least this, sort of principal act, is a little more than a licensing framework for the petroleum industry. Over time, we have added one piece of legislation to it and the other and the rest. And that's the point you have made, right? Which is an absolutely beautiful point to say, look, we didn't maybe have the opportunity to take a holistic view as to how we're going to develop. I mean, take Norway, for example. Norway essentially learning from the phenomenon of resource curse, said to themselves from day one and said, look, we're not going to expend any revenue earned from oil in Norway. We're going to take everything, in fact, and invest it, not even invest it in Norway, invest it in the best investment opportunities abroad. As at today, Norway has accumulated a sovereign wealth fund of over $1.3 trillion. Now imagine what that in reserves can do for any economy, how it can energize funding, how it can energize PPPs, infrastructure transactions, and the likes of it. And as a result, Norway, among other Scandinavian countries, among the happiest people in the world today. What's my point? It is that, so you're right, we have an opportunity. The best time to have done it was at the onset, 50, 60 years ago. We've missed all of that time. Now is a good time to take that sort of holistic view. My point is there a process by which we can address spillage, environmental issues, remediation through administrative processes other than the judicial process? And there are examples of this. I mean, when you had the Macondo spill, yes, a few of those matters went through the judicial process, but the relevant agencies in the US were able to award costs and penalties sufficient to compensate some of the people that were hurt. So you need to create that sort of focused attention. And so the point I'm making is that this issue we're having with the environmental matter only spotlights the entire governance framework. Okay? And that's your point, really. I mean, so it's not only the host communities that were not even looked at, that were not necessarily considered. I would argue that the entire economy was, in fact, not even taken into consideration. I mean, we have an oil industry that has been for over 50 years export focused. Okay? In the proper sense, we don't even have a vibrant petroleum industry, because in order for you to have a vibrant petroleum industry, you need a viable and a vibrant midstream and, of course, a downstream. Today, we're still trying to put that in place. So that's the point you've made, and you're right about it.
Well, you kind of threw a completely new light on that fact, which is the fact that we have been largely export focused and not as holistic in looking at the entire value chain to the advantage of the whole country. That perhaps, if what you're saying right now is anything to consider, that perhaps would explain why the refineries haven't worked as efficiently as they would have. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, again, look, I wasn't prepared to sort of extrapolate things and take them in this way. I don't know. But look, you can say the same thing about just about many things, the way we've handled them in times past, okay? Take power as an example, and I'll get back to the point. But take power as an example. Do you know that the first power plant in Nigeria was built 15 years after the first power plant in England was built? The Jura power plant was built exactly 15 years after the first power plant in the UK was built. Today, the UK has over 100 megawatts installed capacity and are still planning even for, to accommodate growth and the likes of it. What happened? What happened was that whereas they quickly realized that their utility in state-owned, inefficient state-owned monopolies, because there are very few people who can really run efficient state-owned monopolies. China being perhaps one of the best examples. But other people have realized that they can't really quite run efficient and effective state-owned monopolies. So what they did was they opened it up to private investment. And so you were able to invest in that space. My point is that if you make data-driven decisions, And if you looked at the way the population was growing, even if the 4 refineries we have were producing at full capacity, that's a different issue altogether. They still will not be able to meet domestic demands for oil. So what should we have done? We should have opened up that sector, created a sort of framework that is necessary to open up the processing and refining sector and incentivize investment by the private sector and grow it. I mean, when was the last time you heard of inefficiency or corruption at NITEC? For some of us who are old enough to remember the heydays of NITEC, when was the first time? Just because we've done some of these things here, just by opening up that sector, look at how much, how you were able to liberalize and make it a value center rather than a liability to us. So that's the point we're making, is that we need to take that sort of holistic view of how we basically develop our petroleum resources for the benefit of everyone, including the host communities.
It's interesting that you even mentioned. I wonder if anyone who is not so young will remember the word NITEL at all, just the way you have mentioned it. But this judgment of the court and the order of the court re-emphasizing the Supreme Court judgment on this matter and giving a time limit for the payment, how significant pulling that along with the PIB as planned before it becomes a law in itself? Do you think it is prospective, is futuristic enough to anticipate such further problems that could arise, especially whether it's host communities or impacted communities? Many people have died as a result of the oil spills in the north, in the Niger Delta. Oil spill have killed businesses, have killed lives. Do you think this judgment, along with the PIB, will solve such similar problems as may come in the future?
Okay, just so we're clear, the judgment, the actual judgment. So what happened the day yesterday or the day before yesterday was not a judgment ordering Shell to make payments. It was actually a what do you call it now? It was essentially Shell abandoning its challenge of the enforcement of the Supreme Court judgment that was obtained almost 10 years ago. So we need to understand that this entire journey, like you said, has taken about 30 years. They went to the Supreme Court about 10 years ago, and it is the enforcement procedure that has been contested. Now, the judicial process is exactly what it is. It lends itself to these kinds of situations. Okay. Now, 49.5 or thereabout billion naira. I'm not sure whether it is in dollar terms, depending on how you're counting, raises a number of questions. So this money is going to be disbursed. Who is it going to be disbursed to? What's going to be the impact upon the community? Is this any part of it going to go into the remediation of the environment? Because as we speak, those environments continue to be devastated and to be in a mess. The water bodies are undrinkable. You can't fish. Economic livelihoods have been highly compromised. We need to think about those kinds of things. I mean, we can sensationalize 49-point-something billion and everybody just walks away from it. But never waste a crisis. We are where we are, and I think people need to start to think about the environment. People need to think about their future generations. Those who are the recipients of these funds today, are they going to take it, squander it on behalf of the generations that are yet to be born? We need to think about those kinds of things going forward. But just to your point, something to check perhaps in the PIB is the creation of of two funds, the remediation fund and the decommissioning fund. So what this means is that it at least empowers the regulator, in this case the commission, and that's what the upstream regulator going forward is going to be called. It empowers the regulation to at least to intervene with respect to the remediation of the environment. There is going to be fund that will be used to correct some of the things that you're showing on your screen right now. So that's maybe something to check, and then we can take it from there.
Whether or not it is significant, that's another thing altogether. Added to that, to the fact that the federal government, I think in the wake of this government itself, have already begun to have talks around Ogole cleanup. How do we benchmark that against or along with this particular judgment and the issues that you have raised as far as the environment is concerned. Let's take that up when we return after these messages. Do stay with us. Two quick issues to raise with you, Mr. Aye, and that's the fact that this compensation has been ordered and the execution is what you, as you said, is what is being considered now. How significantly do you think it will remediate, if we can even use that word, for the lives of the people, for people whose lives have been lost, and how does it in any way compensate for pay any kind of compensation to the families of the people who have lost their loved ones? Do you think they have factored into this case?
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. I mean, again, how much? Yes, how much can compensate for one life? Not to mention 2 or 3, whatever else. There's no amount of money that can compensate a human life. We need to note that. The second point really is whether this is going to be impactful. Because we talk about significance, we need to talk about also an impact. Is this going to be impactful on the lives of the people that are the Niger Delta? I mean, the Agbara area, which is really where this is about. And is this going to impact the local economy? Is it going to impact the state? Is it going to create any sort of impact? And those are reasons. But our experience have taught us that it is not how much you have that translates to impact. It's how you employ what you have that translates to impact. And which is why I'm saying that the judicial process is probably too inadequate for the multiplicity of issues that are raised in the current circumstances. That you would need a combination of perhaps the judicial process for people who feel aggrieved and believe that they're entitled to compensation to be able to resort to, and that is their right. But as a quasi judicial and perhaps administrative process that can ensure that, one, the environment is remediated, that 2, funds are created. So if you take the whole sort of post-community framework that has been proposed, the kinds of monies that were expended randomly or haphazardly are now required to be put in a trust, where the oil companies will act as settlers and create trusts for the host communities and set up trustees who will then make decisions as to the employment of these funds over time, but not only to build infrastructure, but to create also investments for the future, for future generations. And philosophically, that's something we need to really get in our heads this generation, that, natural resources are both depletable and non-replaceable resources. And any generation that has access holds it in trust for future generations.
But on that, Mr. Aye, if you don't mind, just very, very quickly, if you can speak to this. Now, you referenced it earlier. The host communities have a stake now, and then there is the mention of the impacted communities. The definition is still being questioned, no doubt about that one. But concerning how the PIB will address the issue of host communities and impacted communities in the future to ensure that we do not get to this particular bus stop we are again, how optimistic are you that this law being proposed, already passed, and yet to become law, will answer those questions and we will never have to get here again?
Well, that's a difficult thing for anybody to say, and I certainly wouldn't give you or anyone for that matter that sort of assurance. No matter how well the laws are written, you have to understand that how did we get to where we are? We got here through decades of broken promises, breached trust, and just a lot of, just think about a marriage that has broken down for over 50 years. You're not going to be able to fix it. So there is the framework, which is something to chair, because it is the first time that we have a statutory framework for the engagement between producers and host communities and or impacted communities, whatever that is. Okay? So that's the first time we're having it. But there is the part of implementation where we need to basically build trust and get all stakeholders to give it a fair chance to run and be prepared to pivot and to make adjustments where we find any part of the framework to be defective. That is the more difficult thing to adjust.
Basically, build trust. I'm taking that away. It speaks to a lot of issues in the polity, not just in the oil industry. But we have to thank you very much and hope for the best, as you have said. Israel Aye is partner, commercial and energy law practice, CANDELP, and director with Aspen Energy. Thank you so much for your time and perspectives this morning.
Thanks for having me. I truly appreciate it. All the best.
Okay. So Sunrise Daily takes on another issue right after now.